Welcome to the Art of Tumbao, a podcast dedicated to helping social dancers. I'm so excited to introduce this episode of the Art of Tumbao Podcast. It's all about the Afro-Latin gait, and we have a very special guest.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kathryn O'Brien. I'm a physical therapist and I work with artistic athletes.
And we're going to come together and basically just have a very interesting dialogue about how the art of body mechanics connects to social dancing and specifically the salsa basic time steps. We actually met at a social, and for some reason, instead of dancing, we just were able to get into a very deep and interesting conversation about movement.
Absolutely. So first off, my group of friends always notices him because his outfits are fire and we see it every single time. But this time when we were kind of sitting and chatting, I'm like, oh, I recognize you from another social. How are you doing? He told me a little bit more about his area of study and his area of expertise. And we noticed that we had a lot of overlap when it came to theory, especially when it comes to the gait cycle and what that looks like developing in early childhood into adulthood, and then the deficits and pathologies we can see in gait from the medical side of things as well.
This is so interesting because I come into contact with this a lot, especially when instructing or facilitating dances where people, it's their first steps,
Yes.
right? And it's their first time getting into the dance. And I can see that when people start to adapt their body to these steps, sometimes there's some tensions, sometimes there's some difficulties. And a lot of people ask about, are my hips moving correctly? Or
The classic question, what do I do with my hands? I feel like that transcends all things. Just what do I do with my hands in this moment? But yes, all of those questions are so frequent. And we also see them when we're teaching gait to people, for example, after a spinal cord injury or after a stroke. We have patients who now have to use an assistive device who have never used it before. And they ask that same question of like, but what do I do with my hands? How do I move my feet? What do you mean I have to shift my weight this way to take a step? So whenever we're learning movement, it is such a process. And there's going to be those questions every time.
Exactly. Let's briefly just really introduce you and talk about what you do, because this is one of the main reasons why I asked her to be on this podcast, is because she has a lot of first-hand, first response knowledge.
So I have my doctorate in physical therapy. I'm also an emergency medical responder, and I work with professional performers on a cruise ship. So I do that through a company that is based out of Orlando, and we contract onto these cruise ships to work with the acrobats, the dancers, the actors, and the singers. So we really try to take care of them and make sure their experience as working professionals is as healthy and vibrant as it can be in that way. So I've done simple procedures such as just like soft tissue release for acrobats who have a sore back, because of course they have a sore back. Do you see what they do? They're incredible. And then also having to be a first responder in the case of medical emergencies, such as a stunt that did not land correctly or falling from an apparatus. So I've kind of seen that whole spectrum, as well as for a brief part of my career, I worked in inpatient, I worked in stroke and spinal rehab. And right now I work in an outpatient clinic because I am an orthopedic certified specialist as well.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the first things I noticed about movement, that all of these Afro-Latin dances have a specific movement aesthetic. That's sort of what I call it. It's almost like a signature of movement. The way the knees are bent in a certain way, in a certain flexion, or the different ways people step, how they roll on the ball of their foot, or even the posture of their spine, and the isolations of other parts of their hips, using what I call the dynamic movement model. It's based off of sort of organic and elemental movement. A whole dancer, a dancer that's able to at will move between different elements or move between different movement signatures, So what I notice is that a lot of these Afro-diasporic dances, that the dances that sort of developed at the time that the enslaved people moved to different countries, like Brazil came out samba, right?
Yes.
The Dominican Republic, they got bachata and merengue, and especially Cuba with salsa, which developed out of these other dances that were coming from the countryside.
Yes.
And sort of the way their lifestyle shaped and reflected the movement of their dances. When I went to Cuba, one of the first times I went to Santiago, just the way people walk down the street had their dance in it. You know,
Yes.
it was almost like they were naturally dancing.
Well, it's their rhythm, right? And I think that something that we kind of joke a lot about as physical therapists is you can kind of figure out what somebody's sport is, what one of their hobbies are, by the way that they move through life. When you have people who are really big into bodybuilding and really into push days, their posture is more forward and they'll walk like this all the time. And they like will wiggle through here instead of just relaxing and letting their body move, because that's how they have trained their body to give them support in those bigger lifts. And then that becomes a habit. It's because the body is so efficient. So we have this saying that like nerves that fire together wire together. So neurologically speaking, what that means is if you have a pattern of movement that you repeat over and over and over again, even if you take yourself out of the context of that pattern will repeat in other aspects of your life.
So maybe that's what I was seeing when I was in Cuba, because
Yeah.
maybe I was seeing the manifestation of the culture on the island, the food, the music, the rhythms, because it's happening more out in the street. In areas like here, music is sort of like, there's like laws against it. So it's
Yeah.
not, so the those vibrations aren't flowing through these spaces much, but
Right.
over there it's coming out of the house, it's coming out of the kitchen.
Yes.
And people are just sort of like getting into that vibe, that frequency, and allowing their body to move with it.
So when we talk about these incredible island cultures, and I'm not even just in the Caribbean, but also like in Hawaii, my roommate is Native Hawaiian. Like the way that I see people from those places move, they're used to walking on shifting floors, shifting sand. So the way that their body is ready for that weight shift is so different. So she started with hula. You've met her. She's been at other salsas as well. And she started with traditional hula. And because of that, when she bachatas, you see that movement in her hips. You see that wave that she has. And I've worked with two professional dancers who are both Puerto Rican. And you can see even when they're just dancing for fun as the two of them, not salsa at all, they still have some of that tumbao. They still have some of that chest movement and that syncopation in their step, because it's part of their life growing up. It's part of your childhood. It's part of your ancestry. And I think that that really does come through outside of a context you would expect to see it in.
And you mentioned the key word that sort of defines what I call the Afro-Latin gait. It's the word of tumbao. And so I'm gonna describe what I see tumbao is, and then I would love if you can sort of break down what the human gait cycle is, sort of, and how it relates to some of these things that I've been noticing in the Afro-Latin gait.
Sure.
So, for example, the Afro-Latin gait has a lowered. It's almost as if the body is split, like by the hip, and the movement aesthetics they're almost opposing. So, like from the hips down, it's a very lowered center of gravity. The knees are always bent in these dances. A lot of friction happening with the feet on the floor. Those ball and socket joints in the hips are responding to what's happening under, creating those isolations.
Yeah.
But then when it moves up, because of the cultural hybrid of what was happening at the time, the fusion of Congolese and Spanish cultures and West African and European movement styles, this is what sort of created this lower half African movement aesthetic, upper half more European movement aesthetic. A lot of the upper half in the shoulders and the chest, you have the frame, which was
Yes.
very important in a lot of some of the British court dances.
Yeah.
If you look at a lot of court dances, they're always in frame. And the
Yes.
frame is not really moving, it stays. And you have that in salsa on the top, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of those aspects of how the posture is, how the almost floating movement of the torso, which is very
Yeah.
interesting, and it's almost floating up. That movement in salsa's there. Then the isolations in the shoulders, and
Yeah.
how just like the hips respond to the feet and the knees, the hands are responding to the shoulders, the chest, torso,
Yeah.
right? And it's sort of flowing out there.
Yeah.
So this is just sort of what I designate an Afro-Latin gait. When you really watch a dancer who has embodied this, their movement, the way they walk through the room, the way they perform on stage, it really emits some type of energy. And that's what Celia Cruz was saying in her song, La
Yes.
Negra Tiene
Yeah.
Tu Sal. It's this woman that with the shake of her hips,
Yes.
she puts a ripple out into the universe.
Yes. I think when you see somebody who can really slow down that step to explain it, you see that wave of motion of, okay, I've tried my ankle, I've tried my hip, and now I have to take a step. that's actually your body functioning perfectly. That's your body taking care of you. That's your body keeping you from falling over.
Exactly.
So when we think of it as, it's not about being able to catch yourself or not catch yourself. It's your ability to fall with style, to quote Buzz Lightyear, to fall in such a way that you are continuing that motion into momentum. So it's not just a fall, it is momentum into your next step, which is where that whole gait cycle kind of happens. It's all about a continuous falling into momentum.
That's very interesting that you describe it as that, because the actual word tumbao, it actually means to topple over.
Yeah.
If you actually look at that word, tumbarse, and it's also, they use the word tumbao as the way all the instruments are intersecting within a polyrhythmic cycle of music.
Yes.
So, for example, there's the bass tumbao, there's the conga tumbao, and it's almost as like how their rhythm walks through the measure.
Yes.
You know, so it's interesting that the way the human gait cycle is set up, it's a constant toppling over where we catch
Yes.
ourselves, right? So can you briefly just describe the human gait cycle in total, because I know there's a lot of vocabulary.
Yes.
And I would encourage you, don't let back.
Okay.
Because even if somebody doesn't know, it's a good opportunity to learn about this stuff. Like as a movement coach, it's helped me to learn this vocabulary so that I'm able to identify, some things that I'm seeing, because a lot of the movement, it's sort of subconscious.
It really is. So, first off, if anybody feels like, oh my gosh, what is she talking about? I don't understand. Don't worry. I had to take an entire semester on just gait. That was the entire course, was just breaking down the human gait cycle in different times in our lives, different pathologies we can see with it, the angle that our joints should be at different parts of gait. So don't get frustrated with yourself. This was 5 months of my life. Like, it's okay. But that being said, there's two main parts of gait, which is the stance phase and the swing phase. When we talk about gait, we talk about it in reference to one limb at a time, because our gait cycle is constantly reciprocating, right? Like, it's one side to the other all the time. But when we are looking for deficits in gait, it helps us to look at one side and then the other side. It also helps us to know from the patient a little bit of their background. We rely on our patients to give us a little bit of background or to know their history. For example, if I know somebody has Parkinson's, I'm going to be looking for some specific things. If I know somebody has sprained their ankle multiple times in the past, if I know somebody has hypermobility, if I know that somebody is a ballerina, I'm going to be looking for a couple of things in their gait that might explain their current symptoms or their current pain. So we start with initial contact, and that's when your heel strikes the ground. Then we go into a loading response. At that time, you should have a slight bend in your knee. If you don't have a slight bend in your knee, that means that your quad was too weak to take that force. When we're walking, it's approximately 2 to 3 times our body weight, if I'm remembering correctly, that has to go through our lower extremities in terms of force. That's a lot of force. If your quad can't take that, you're going to see your knee shooting back and being straight instead of having that bent loading response. Once we're past loading response, we have our stance. So then you're going to have single leg stance. Now there's front stance, there's middle stance, there's back. There's all these little parts of stance. We're not going to worry about that. You have a moment where you're standing on one leg by itself. No matter how you walk, there is always a moment where you are standing on one leg by itself. So if you don't have the balance to do that, that is when you may have a fall risk. And that's where rehab assisted devices come in, right? Now, if we're looking at dance, if you're on one leg and you get pushed off balance and your lead doesn't have that strong frame that you were talking about earlier, that's when you're going to fall into a step that perhaps was not planned, or you're going to slide, or you're going to embarrass yourself in some other ways that I might be very well acquainted with. And that can happen, and that's okay. Now, after that, we start having our terminal stance and then our pre-swing, which is when your heel lifts off of the ground and you are getting ready to swing forward with that leg. And then we have our 3 phases of swing. At the end of that 3rd phase of swing, you need to have a bent knee ready to then go into initial contact again.
Yeah. So one thing you said was so interesting. It's almost like the inverse of what you said is what I do in movement coaching.
Okay.
Because when somebody comes up to learn a dance, for example, say let's say bachata, right? I always express the importance of knowing a little bit about the dancer's background,
Yes.
so they know what kind of movement that their body is expected to get into. How I like to describe it is moving in key.
Okay.
So, like musicians, when they play their instrument, their notes have to be in key to be able to feel like they're a part of the song naturally.
Yes.
Those notes flow with the song. So, movement in key is sort of how I see when getting into, let's say, that lowered center of gravity with bachata. So, you can do all those footworks because a lot of
Yes.
the traditional bachata has a lot of footwork.
Yes.
And for that to happen, it's almost like the energy has to drop, like the blood has to go into the
Yes.
legs.
I'm laughing because I have said that to so many leads in my life. I'm like, just take a deep breath and like sink into the floor a little bit. It's okay.
So I guess let's move into some of those. I mean, I was doing some research on the human gait and I saw the concept of pathologies.
Yes.
And that sort of put words to everything I've been seeing when I suggest corrections in somebody I'm training or teaching. You can see sort of like pathologies to the Afro-Latin gait or it comes to like the Afro-Latin gait, sort of like abnormalities of the Afro-Latin
Yeah.
gait, or maybe if something happened and something is off and there's some sort of compensations going on. I'm gonna just list some. I just want to hear what you have to say about them. Like,
Cool.
okay, like one is bopping up and down when doing the basic salsa step. So if you can imagine like the top of your head, like there's
Yes.
a little light, right? A light, and then you turn all the lights off, and then you tell them to do your basic salsa step. The light bounces, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like that's a pathology because usually a dancer in these dances, like when they walk, it's almost like they're floating.
It's very smooth.
It's smooth.
It's very
Yes.
smooth. And part of that has to come from that weight transfer and that weight acceptance that happens in gait. So to me, this is a really great example of somebody getting that out of context wiring in a new context and not being able to differentiate and turn that off. Especially coming from a different style of dance. If you're coming from jitterbug, if you're coming from East Coast swing, Lindy hop, all of those dances, you have to have that bounce or you're going to be dead in the water.
That's real. That's
So
true.
for me right now, I'm actually trying to get into a little bit of swing because it is such a different style of dance as well. But I'm sticking more West Coast because that's closer to what I'm used to. But I've tried doing some of that East Coast Lindy hop, collegiate swing style, and you have to be bouncing the whole time. So they've built that habit into their movement, and then they try to bring that old style of moving into a new style of dance. And it's really hard. And as somebody who has tried to do both styles, you really do have to like switch your mindset. It's almost like speaking a different language.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, that's so interesting. Here's another one for you.
Sure.
Clunky footwork. So this is something that I encounter a lot, and sometimes when people start first learning steps, their moves it's almost as if you are in a studio where the floors are hollow, you
Yeah.
can really hear people's steps.
Yeah, the elephant feet.
Elephant feet. So one thing that is sort of interesting about what I've noticed about the Afro-Latin gait is the concept of instead of heel strike, it's more ball roll down.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because the human gait cycle starts with the heel strike, but it's almost as if the Afro-Latin gait starts with the ball roll, and that's what really makes it so the absorption on the ground gives it a softer. It just allows faster footwork if you're on the toes of your feet too, as opposed to your heels hitting.
Well, you're describing a runner's gait. So runners, especially sprinters, they will have impact. That initial contact that I said was on the heel. When you're running, it's going to be on the balls of your feet. Because you get better push off through there, you get better force absorption through your forefoot, midfoot, hindfoot, and ankle, because your foot is actually separated into 3 different parts. So all of that makes total sense, and that's also why you're able to do a better weight shift. It's also interesting, that's how women walk in heels. When we're talking about learning these new patterns, I sometimes will tell people like, hey, I know it sounds silly, get a cheap $20 pair of dance shoes and use them to learn. Because what that's going to do is automatically shift your weight to the balls of your feet.
Exactly.
And that's going to be really, really helpful. I make my dancers do a lot of their exercises on the balls of their feet because I'm mean, but I'm also very good at my job. So I will make them like, okay, you have to walk for me on the balls of your feet. Like walk on your tiptoes all the way across the clinic and back. Like I want to see how you move. How are your hips moving? Is there a drop in your hips? Because there's a natural, it's called the Trendelenburg effect, I guess you could say, where when you're crossing one foot in front of the other, if your hip abductors, abductors, so the ones that move your hips out to the side, if they're not strong enough, you'll have a drop in your hip when you take a step. Now, that is stylistically part of the dance, and that's okay. But we want that to happen on purpose, not on accident. Because when it happens on accident, that's how you hurt yourself. And we don't want any pain, we don't want any injuries. We want you to be able to move beautifully, safely, and with, I almost want to say like with a kindness to yourself and to your partner when you're social dancing. And if you don't have control of your movement, if you're just falling into it and not in a stylistic way, in a way that's accidental, that's when you're going to have moments like, man, my back is really sore after going to social. Oh, my hips hurt. My knees feel weird. Yeah, because you didn't have control through those steps. You just kind of accidentally did them and hoped for the best.
Okay, since you mentioned the hips, let's talk about what I see in the hips.
Yes, please.
So one of the main things that happens is, when people see a salsa dancer, they're like, oh, look at one of the first things they see is their hips, maybe their arm movement, but
Yeah.
also what's happening with the hips, because it looks almost like a snake
Yes.
type of thing or a figure eight type of thing. But so when people try it, when they try to embody that, what ends up happening is when they take their break step, it's almost like they push their hips out with their step.
Yeah.
And then they come back to the center, then they push their hips out with their step again. So it's almost the same thing as if I was leading, right? And if you were to feel me pull your hand in as opposed to connecting with your core
Yeah.
and sort of like pulling you from the core energy, it's almost like the accentuation of pushing the hips with the break step. It makes it a little bit extra, but when someone brings that energy in and starts to move the hips through the knees,
Yes.
then the hips start to isolate and it looks completely different.
It really does. And I think the best way for me to kind of touch on this is to actually talk about different styles of dance and what's happening in the hips in those moments. So for example, with Kizomba, it's actually more of a pelvic tilt. So it's an anterior posterior pelvic tilt that's happening. And because of that, I once had somebody be like, it's almost like they're walking and twerking at the same time. They're like, because they are. That's what they're doing. It's an anterior posterior pelvic tilt as they take their steps. And that's how they're able to go through it. When we're looking at hula, we're looking at much more of that lateral sway, that lateral motion. But that comes from, according to my roommate and according to some practitioners of hula who have been kind enough to teach me, it is a closed practice. I do not practice hula, but it's actually through the roll of their feet where they get the movement in their hips, according to the people who have taught me a little bit more about it so I can treat it better. They say all of their motion in their hips comes through the roll of their feet, very much like they're moving sideways through sand. When we're talking about merengue, that movement in the hips comes from that downward push through the knee because you have a fall through the other knee and then your hip has nowhere to go. It has to go up. You have to have that tilt of it side to side. So when we've kind of talked about those styles of dance in which your hips are supposed to move, now let's talk about a style of dance where your hip is not supposed to move. Let's talk about jitterbug. Jitterbug, you need to keep some really good, strong foundation in your hips and in your torso, or you are going to fall. Like there's no escaping it. You're going to fall over if you try to do jitterbug and do salsa hips. That's not the vibe. It'll look cool for half a second, and then you'll be like, oh my gosh, I've lost all rhythm and all steps, and I don't know what's going on anymore.
Right.
So that's because all of their movement is supposed to be their knees coming up and down to meet the steady state of their hips. Whereas what I see in salsa is it's you're allowing motion through your hips to meet the motion of your knees.
Wow.
Which is a different framework, right? It's exactly what you were talking about earlier with like you almost have that separation at your belt of like the chest is up and the hips are down, and that allows some of that isolation. But another way that I've taught this movement to people before is when you have that fall of your chest, just let your hips naturally want to go the way that they want to go. Because when we walk, we automatically do contralateral movement syncing. So when we walk, our right arm is going to move with our left leg, and our left arm is going to move with our right leg. So if you just allow that fall to happen, automatically your hip's going to jut out a little bit because you're having that fall, and our body is wired to move in triangles, X's, and contralateral pairs. That's what we're made to do. So let it do that, but find your right point of focus. In salsa, I'm very rarely focusing on how my hips are moving. I'm almost always focusing on how is my chest falling and are my knees able to push through the ground correctly? And then that will give me that hip motion.
Wow. Let's talk. Can we talk about one more?
Yes, of course.
Okay, because this is amazing. How about the motion of the arms? And so
Okay.
what I see a lot, I see this a lot, especially with leads. One of their hands will just be down, sort of like it's almost as if it's like limp or something.
Yeah.
But they don't have a limp arm, you know. But for some reason, it's just
just
that arm.
dangling.
Yeah, that arm didn't go to school. It just stayed home.
It's just dangling.
You know,
It's just
yeah.
there.
But it
Oh,
happens a
man.
lot, and especially when people are first starting, they don't know what to do with their hands because it
Yes.
feels weird, you know, or
Yes.
it's just kind of like it's not natural.
Absolutely.
But a lot of the times, I have to sort of encourage movement that it's almost with these dances, the arms are almost above the waist. It's almost as if they float there almost all the time,
Yes.
unless there's little shines where it can come out.
Yes.
So it's like the arms almost act as sort of like sparks. Like
Yes.
yeah, you can make sparks with them, and there's a lot of the movement. How I consider it is responsive.
Yes.
Because a lot of the arm motion is it's actually energy that's being like rippled out of the body.
It's really interesting you describe it that way, because you've danced with me, I do very minimal amounts of styling, but when I do style, I feel like in my mind it's always like, oh, I'm flicking something off. Like I'm flicking water off, or I'm flicking sparks off of my hand, like depending on what song is playing. And that's how I think of how I do different things, is I'm like, oh, I need to get this water droplet off of them. Like, let me get this off real quick.
Right.
And that's just what has come naturally to my body and what I think has suited my individual style as a dancer.
So okay, I'm curious about, like, I really want to break down the salsa gait
Sure.
cycle and see what you think about it, because it's interesting when it gets into different salsa timings, which is another thing that I teach that's gets complicated for people who are first learning it. Where weight is shifted before steps is sort of like this subtle language that not a lot of people talk about. It sort of starts with both feet planted in the center usually,
Yeah.
or in that center area.
Yeah.
And then that's where weight shifting can happen before break steps, which is a step that goes forward. But I find it interesting, the difference between the salsa gait cycle, because it's almost like an oscillating cycle, because you step forward, but then you have to step back to complete the cycle.
Yeah.
As opposed to walking, where it's sort of like a vector based, where
Yeah.
you're in a direction, but these dances, they have an opposing element to them.
First off, that initial weight shift that you're talking about is so important across all gait cycles, across all sports. And it's a main reason why I know as a follow, I'm going to have a good time at the social with whatever partner if the first thing they do is just be like, shift me side to side. And then I'm like, okay, good, we're going to have a good time. Like, this is going to be good, this is going to be nice. Because that means that not only are they aware of where my weight is in my feet, but they can control it and they can communicate that control to me. Because those are three separate things as a follow that I have to figure out, do you know how to do this, or do I have to manage it myself? Because if you start sending me into a turn or a crossbody lead and my weight is not on the correct foot, I have to jerry rig my way through that step and know that you're not potentially going to notice, other than, oh, that didn't feel quite right. Oh, well, moving on. And that is stressful as a follow. But also that weight shift, even before our initiation of just normal walking gait, you have to shift your weight a little bit onto one foot, then use that momentum to get to the other foot, and then take a step, right? It's that start of momentum that it's small and gets bigger and then you go. So when I see that in salsa, that almost yo-yo effect that you're talking about with the forward and back, what I like about that is it really, to me, is very similar to the ability to navigate obstacles in our day-to-day walking as well. So you should be able to, as a human being, put your weight fully forward and then go, nope, never mind. I'm good. I'm going to come back. And when I'm teaching somebody how to walk again after they've had hip surgery, after they've had knee surgery, after a stroke, I always start with weight shifts. And they have to show me a side-to-side weight shift, and they have to show me a forward-to-back weight shift. And they have to do that with both hands upper extremity support, with one hand upper extremity support. And then, depending on if they need an assistive device or not, or they want an assistive device or not, because some people make the decision, which I think is very fair and smart, to say, I'm going to have a cane for the rest of my life. I want to learn this with a cane. And then I have some people who say, no, I don't want this walker. I don't want this cane. Get me off of it. And depending on what their goals are, which it's their life and it's very valid, whatever those goals may be, I'll provide that support in their exercise. So after they give me one hand, we'll either move to their assistive device for the weight shift or none at all. And of course, throughout this entire process, we keep them safe. They have a gait belt, which is literally a belt that I can hold on to as the therapist so that I don't have to give them a wedgie if they lose their balance. But with that, this was something that we were joking about the other day. All of my clinical instructors, when I was finishing up my doctorate, we do clinical rotations, were very pleasantly surprised, I would like to say, by how easy it was for me to teach gait to people who had had strokes. Because for that, we are often fully shifting their weight for them. Often we're on little itty bitty scooters on the floor, and we're shifting their weight for them, picking up their foot, placing it, and then shifting their weight back. It almost reminded me of kizomba in a way.
Exactly.
Because in kizomba, you can scoop with your foot, you can scoop with your knee, you're supposed to be guiding with your sternum the whole time. So
exactly.
It really reminded me of kizomba when I was doing that with stroke patients. And then Parkinson's patients actually are extremely benefited by doing tango. There's been tons of research showing that Parkinson's patients have a better ability to navigate their symptoms if they take tango classes. Because of that ability to move past what we see in a Parkinson's gait, which is usually a stutter step and an inability to navigate obstacles. Tango is all about creating an obstacle from your other partner's feet and then navigating that obstacle with smooth gliding, large steps. Tango is a large steps dance, and that is what Parkinson's treatment is all about, is those bigger movements, because they have an inability to tell how big their movement is.
Wow, that brings up something interesting to me, especially talking about the brain.
Yeah.
Because, okay, I'll teach a basic salsa step, let's say linearly, like front and then go back, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll do a lateral one, side to side, kind of like a rumba step. But then the point I've always noticed is, and so interesting, the point where people really get confused or their feet get like stuck is when I tell them to do a cross step.
Yep.
And I'm like, it has to be something with the brain that's happening.
Absolutely. Well, first off, when you're doing a cross step, you're taking yourself out of your center of, so we have a center of gravity and we have our base of support. Our body is used to our base of support changing while we walk and we move. But it's used to it changing ipsilaterally. So if you're moving a limb, your base of support, when you pick up that limb, is going to shrink to the singular limb that you have left on the ground. And your brain is kind of already like, oh, okay, now our base of support is going to shift to the same side once they put their foot back down again. But when you're crossing, either in front or behind, nope, your base of support just shifted even more to the side that it was already at. And so your brain has to be like, wait, shoot, hold on, that was not the plan. That was not the plan. Can we pause and back up? And that's okay. But then once you get used to that, your body is more able to manage those unpredictable shifts.
So the last pathology that I wanted to get your perspective on is with the frame specifically. I basically have trained myself to see the depths of a person through the language of movement. There's something so interesting that this knowledge that I've developed with the data from movement, I'm able to just dance with somebody and I'm like, oh, this person is a CEO of a company.
Yes.
And then I'll ask them, are you the CEO of a company? And they'll be like, how did you know that? There was something in the movement. There was something in the quality of tension that I was receiving to make me know, like, oh, okay, this isn't a certain modality of element. This isn't a certain charge. and this is in a certain polarity. And these are the sort of three things that I use as a lens for movement. So when it comes to the frame, I've noticed a lot of times the frame can have pathologies in a way to where it can suggest different emotional things, is what I noticed.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like one of the basic ones is someone's head is down. Like
Yes.
the head is part of the upper
Yep.
frame, and it's like,
And their head looks like this.
exactly, yes. Or I've noticed, that might connotate, not having confidence, feeling something like that.
Yeah.
I've also noticed when a frame is, I can almost describe it as when someone's frame is inside of your frame. And it
Yeah.
stays there. It's almost like crouched over.
Yeah.
So it's almost like their center is leaning on you.
Yeah.
And that can say things, about a person's, like, how much power are they giving?
Or how much power are they expecting to have? What I have noticed a lot of times, both when I've been a lead and as a follow, is that the amount that somebody takes up that space, and this is not a positive or negative thing, this is just part of it, is the amount of space they feel they must take up to be safe. So I have friends who you've actually danced with and you don't know it, who have had to learn to take up extra space in their life to create safety for themselves. And when I try to lead them, and they feel safe with me from at least what they've told me, so I hope that they still feel safe with me as they've learned and grown, but they even, with me, a safe person, feel the need to back lead or take up more space or resist what I'm doing to show that they can. And I can never fault them for that, especially in follows, because it's like, okay, clearly something has happened here where you have valid reason to not easily give up control and to not give space. You must take the space and own it. When I see that in leads, whether they be men or women, usually those leads have had life experiences where if they do not command the space that they are in, they have faced bad consequences for that, which is probably what you feel in people when you're like, are you a CEO? Like, that's probably the same thing you're feeling. You're feeling that forward lead, that command, that is not communication, because there's a difference between those two things. But sometimes in the corporate world, leaders have to command, and that's how everybody knows what to do. But a really good leader knows when to communicate instead. And that's true in dance as well.
Okay, so the last thing I want us to talk about is the concept of conditioning movement, because this is something that I work with a lot with as a movement coach, specifically, because as a movement coach, I go beyond teaching basic steps. I get into someone's lifestyle, and I get into their movement practices. According to my dynamic movement model, for example, I have different elemental movement signatures, which, okay, somebody with a fiery movement style or with a watery movement style, they'll really adapt to bachata easily with if they already move like in a watery way. Lots of rotation movements, lots of pulsing movements, not right angles. Seems like their hands move in curves.
Yes.
So but what I like to think of is, like, I don't like it to identify as one element, because I feel like that's actually a crutch. Like, a lot of people identify, but oh yeah, I'm a fiery dancer. I think the biggest way to empower someone to become a whole dancer is to be able to choose that will and move through them. Like, have the mobility to move with intention. It's like, oh, okay, this person is coming like this. Let me get into my water.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I'm gonna need to, like, move into my fire. Which those are opposing elements, so it takes a really skilled and intentional mover to do that. But when I'm like facilitating the growth of a dancer, I really do it in a way that it really conditions movement so that it becomes authentic.
Yeah. To me, it almost sounds like we have a native movement pattern, but we should be able to be polylingual. We should be able to speak multiple languages of movement. And when I am rehabilitating someone, I do that as well, but it looks a little bit different. So what I kind of explain to people is that, but the way that you have to use your legs to ride a bike, is not the exact same as the way you would need to use your legs to walk through sand. They need to react in different ways. And similarly to this idea of we have natural movement patterns that we fall into, we have natural muscle dominances that we fall into. So I'm sure everybody's heard of like quad dominance versus glute dominance, right? When you're squatting, you'll see people who are like, man, I cannot grow my glutes because I just quads all day. And then you have to learn how to shift your body weight, how to set up the lift such that you are able to engage your glutes more, because it does not come naturally to your body. You are not wired that way specifically. Or you have your fast twitch, slow twitch, and mixed muscle fibers that help us with distance versus rapid movement versus a combination of the two. So everything you're talking about, first off, I 100% agree. Second off, it sounds to me like in terms of training, you almost have to separate them in a larger way so that you can navigate them in a closer way.
Exactly. My method, I like to do the get there fast by going slow method.
Yes.
And it's sort of a method that is kind of hard to teach because that process can seem monotonous. It can
Yes.
seem boring, but it's almost like the Karate Kid effect. It's like you're doing something you're doing something on such an unconscious level that when
Yeah.
you get put into the environment, you just respond.
Yes.
And that's what happens with who I teach. So I'll do, like, for example, if it's a movement, like let's say cha-cha-cha, right?
Okay.
That cha-cha-cha shuffle that's in the center position of the Afro-Latin gait.
Yeah.
Like when you get to the center, you do cha-cha-cha. Then you break.
Yeah.
That cha-cha-cha, I really bring down the tempo. I'll do it to a wahida.
Okay.
And like a wahida is like a slow son.
Yeah.
And that pace allows people to really like sink into the feel. And then I start there as opposed to starting with a faster cha-cha-cha. And then I notice when people start in that slow tempo, when the tempo rises, they got it instantly.
Yes.
But if somebody learns on a fast tempo, when the tempo rises, they'll get it and lose it.
No, and you're totally right. I'm going to say something, and I'm sure all of you have either said it or you've heard somebody say it. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do this. Wait, I can't do it slow. Let me do it fast. I'll figure it out and then I'll slow it down. Like, I swear the amount of times I've heard someone be like, oh, I'm going to teach you this thing. No, I am not. I need to do it fast. And then they reverse engineer it because they've forgotten how to do it slow, or because they never tried to do it slow. They were just trying to get it to a specific speed to match tempo. And there's nothing wrong with needing to reverse engineer, because you know the whole transitive property of like A equals B, B equals C, so A equals C. We can do that and know that mathematically, right? Well, our brain is really, really, really efficient. And it will get to the point where it'll just go, oh, A equals C. We're good. A equals C. Don't worry about it. And you almost have to consciously choose the B equals C first to complete that transitive property, but you don't even know that you don't do it anymore. So when you are teaching something and taking the time to teach it slow, what you're doing is solidifying this mental pathway and these decision-making moments in the brain, so that when you do speed it up, you've gotten to this point of A equals C, but you know how you got there.
I really like to think about this a lot, because when it comes to personal practice, I like to connect it to personal lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I'm teaching someone about musicality, I'll be like, okay, put it on at a low volume while you're cooking.
Yes.
And then it starts to seep into the
Yes.
unconscious. And then by the time it comes on at the social, you're like, oh, I know that. Like something says, I know that.
Yeah.
And then it just helps you get into it better.
Yes.
So have you noticed anything with working with people? What are some ways of practicing that really helps to embody movement?
Ooh. Well, first off, you touched on something that I really teach my students as a clinical instructor, which is that anything that you give somebody to do at home needs to fit into their life already. So we have things called HEPs, which are home exercise programs. And not only do I tell my students, you should never be giving somebody more than 3 things to do a day, ever, because they're not going to. But the second thing is, this should easily fit into what their daily routine already is. So I oftentimes, for my low back patients, I will give them exercises that they can do directly when they wake up in the morning. Just throw the covers off of you, and while you're still laying there in bed, here's 2 exercises to do, and when you stand up, your back won't hurt as much. But you're already laying in bed, so just, it's fine. They're right there. You don't have to move. Coming up with these exercises that fit into your daily life is the first step. The second step is to be aware of your motor learning principles. So with motor learning principles, this is a whole area of science that if you're really interested in teaching and motor coaching, I really strongly recommend it. It gets into the neuroscience of learning, specifically through that prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, which is the areas of the brain that handle motor control and motor planning. One of the aspects of motor learning is this idea of mass versus variable practice. So mass practice is doing the same task over and over and over and over and over again so that you get it into your system. You're like, okay, I got it. We're good. Variable practice is the opposite of that. It's changing which task you're doing from rep to rep or from practice to practice. Now, we actually see better learning with variable task, but only after mass practice has been mastered. So it's like, and what I mean by that is that if you have somebody doing a sit to stand and they don't know how to do a sit to stand at all, you shouldn't be doing like, okay, sit to stand, now pick up that object from the floor and now go stand on one foot and now do a step, da, da, da. No, because they're still figuring out how to get out of the chair. But if you say, okay, we're gonna do 5 sit to stands, and you do 5 sit to stands and you're like, okay, you now have the basic sit to stand. Is it perfect? No. And that's okay. You can do it though. And that's what I'm looking for.
Usually people, because of their background, because of their culture, they tend to move in the same pattern, through their lives. They tend to fall into a predictable movement pattern,
Okay.
as they walk around just naturally, unless something happens, a traumatic event, or or they consciously choose to move a different way.
Yeah. And that, I mean, like that goes into cycle breaking, right? Because if you are taught to move in a certain way all of your life, and most of what we're taught as children is not spoken to us. It's monkey see, monkey do. Most of how we develop is just picking up on what our parents are doing and then doing that same thing. So if you're raised to move a certain way and then you make the choice to move a different way, not only is that incredibly powerful, but that choice is going to be very much solidified in your mind and because you've made a decision to do this. I did not come from a movement background that is anything related to Latin, but I came with a respect for the music and a desire to understand and a want to learn more and become educated about the culture. So I do speak Spanish, I do dance to Latin music, and I do try to help other people dance to Latin music. But all of that comes with a necessary humility that it is not my culture. I'm just taking part in the joy of spreading it.
So thanks again for watching the Art of Tumbao. I want to give a big thanks to Kathryn, Dr. Kathryn.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's been such a joy talking about all this stuff. It's my favorite.
And if they want to get in contact with you, how could they do that?
Absolutely. So I have an Instagram. It's DPT Dancer. You can see updates there on different conferences I go to or whenever I'm on a contract with performers. It's just a great place to use as a learning tool as well.
Thanks so much for tuning in.